Programmer, software developer, coder, software system engineer, whatever you call yourself, you need to follow software programming standard and guideline for the proper design, implementation and testing methods needs to create a stable, efficient and resilient software based system following industry approved standard. And guideline will not only aid you in creating system and maximum usability and minimum security issues, but will also help you find and fix issues in systems created without regards to follow proper standard and practices. You have probably heard the terms of standard, guidelines, recommendation and best practices. These are all things our developers must know and follow. But just what are they and which do you use for what? A standard is a formalized set of rules, method, patterns and languages shared amongst the production team and used to create a uniform product. A software standard allows different teams and developers to understand each other's program code and measure it for conformity to accepted standards of quality. Guidelines are advice on how to implement a standard or a policy. For example, a standard may require that software to be checked with a static analysis tool to find potential security issues. Well, how should you as a software developer do that? The standard doesn't say, instead leaving it up to the individual software development and team to decide how to implement that detail. Someone may have published a guideline document with the instruction on how to use such a tool in your code. So if you ever find that and you are asking yourself, how do I do that? There is probably a guideline published somewhere that will tell you a recommendation is similar to the information that you find in the standard, but it's not officially sanctioned. So, thus more like advice recommendation are often proposed to a standard usually created after the code is published. So, I recommendation might be that software with the ability to communicate over a network should support the use of encryption and some encryption standard to use what also be recommended. How do you implement and design a encryption in your software? I'll bet there is a guideline for that. And finally, a best practice is a type of recommendation that has shown through trial and application to be generally the best solution to a problem. A best practice may contain step-by-step procedures like a guideline, or it may also be very abstract like a standard can be there, and also best practices for managing a global enterprise and level software development team. And for these best practices for help to keep workspace tidy and efficient. When trying something new, first look for the practice as a document to learn from the trial and error of other people who tried it before you. Where do you find standard recommendation, guideline and best practices for secure software development? So I will give you a hint. I find them in a place that start with the letter of G, and all it's Google. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at some of the more prominent sources of information on security and coding practices. So the source code development and standard and practices The mostly unsafe languages are C, C++, and assembly. So the better is to use the safe language like Net Framework, Java, Perl, Python, Ruby, and try to better to ignore the unsafe function libraries and APIs like str copy, like etc., and better to use the safe function and APIs. So Software Engineering Institute mostly use C, C++, Java, Windows and Android to set as and certain coding standard which are rules for writing secure code and recommendation for improving software security. And these are the top 10 coding practices, and the most important are, I would say, 1, 6 and 7, which is validate input, adhere to the principle of least privilege, sanitize data sent to the other system. And also content web app security flows are mostly like A1 injection, A2, A3, A4 to A10, and Microsoft security developments lifecycle, which mainly reduce both security vulnerability and reduce the development cost, and which is helpful for Microsoft's trustworthy computing initiative, and for the purpose of security, privacy, reliability, and business integrity, and which SDR released to public in 2008, and following the SDL standard is recommended for all organizations development software for the Microsoft Windows environments. So who is responsible for the security code? So I would say the software developers, because the software developers who secure design and coding practices, who always range checking and input checks, the input validation, and better to not use the unsafe calls or code libraries, and use the programming tools for the safety features. Choose language that may buffer overflow impossible to occur, and review code for potential buffer mismatch. And obviously the software testers. So software tester who does the black box testing and test all API inputs, and also same as the software developers checks the range checking and input validation, and use a wide variety of data types for input testing, and work the overflow condition without data input. So also software testers does the developer producer for reliably reproducing the errors. And finally, also testers should talk to the software developers to secure the codes.